Hey everybody, Payments Professor here with a wonderful topic for today's podcast. It has to do with financial crimes. And to be able to discuss financial crimes, I have Rene Perez. He is actually the National Director for Sales of Financial Crimes with Jack Henry. And he's going to be giving us some enlightenment. And I mean enlightenment because I've seen him talk before when it comes to what's happening in the world of financial crimes and cybersecurity and all that fun stuff that we get to deal with. So Rene, I want to welcome you to the Payments Podium.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for having us here or having me here.
All right. First question now I do have to ask everybody who comes on the payments podium, at least the first time, is how in the world did you get started with payments? Because it's one of those weird areas, fun areas in life that I've found. For me, I was teaching at a technical college and all of a sudden a fintech said, hey, would you come here and work for us? I'm like, what is electronic payments? What are you talking about? So, how did you get started in electronic payments?
Uh, Kind of funny. I was in the hotel business prior to what I do now. And hotels are open 365, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They never close. Uh, 24 years ago, I decided to get out of hotels and come over and do something different. I answered a open career day at a local institution. Hit it off with their head of credit card fraud and got a position as a credit card fraud analyst. And then the rest is history. I became the BSA officer and fraud officer of that institution within 7 years, and then been at Jack Henry now 17 years yesterday.
Well, congratulations. And it is always an interesting story. So I kind of heard a little bit that you got into this because of banking hours. Because I got to say, that was one of the things that appealed to me 20 some years ago as well.
100%, 100%. Being able to kind of have that life, start a family, that type of thing, be active in the family, 100%.
And plus, it's also one of those when you get into it, there's more to it than you thought. Because I also heard in there you became the BSA and the fraud officer. And I was going to follow that up by asking, how did you end up in the fraud world? Was that intentional? And is it just something that, you took to? Because for me, that was exactly it. Payments rules, regulations, I could read them and understand them. And it was the weirdest thing. So how did you end
It,
up
it
in the world
really,
of
it
cyber crimes and fraud?
It really is. It really was for me as well. So the one thing it was once I got into the looking at card fraud, finding it, doing our investigations, recovering money, that type of thing, it actually kind of became a passion, and it was something that I didn't know I wanted to do, and just kind of became natural for me. So we started in that group. I moved up to run that card fraud team, and then eventually went up to run what was called the unit within the fraud team, or sorry, special investigative units within the fraud team. So what we were really doing back then is just the very cusp of the start of BSA program and starting it for the institution. So at that time, we didn't have a BSA program at my institution, and eventually became. So I'll tell you this story. It's kind of fascinating. I led that team for about 3 years, and we did several very high level cases from a fraud perspective, national type of cases.
Uh-huh.
And right around that time was when the OCC specifically was starting to look and making sure your larger mid regionals are started having BSA departments in. So I got a call from my chief risk officer of the bank and asked me to come down to our headquarters, which is about 3 miles down from the office I worked at. And he said, "Hey, Renee, congratulations. You are now the BSA officer of the bank. And the OCC is on the 17th floor in the conference room and they want to talk to you." So it was trial by fire. It's like jumping off the deep end of the pool. And that day we established our BSA department, ended up hiring BSA manager and BSA team within that first year. But yeah, that was very interesting how I became the BSA officer of the bank.
So in one day, you promoted and at the same time told that, hey, OCC's here, you need to go talk to him. So I know I've had jobs where it felt like drinking from a fire hose when I got
Yep.
promotions and things. I feel that was more like you literally got thrown in with the sharks and had
No,
to see.
it's absolutely right. The good thing is that they were a great group of examiners, and I walked in. I said, "Look, I took the job 10 minutes ago, I might not have all the information. Give me some time. I will go and grab all the information. I'll pull it all together for you." And we did get a couple little small dings, but overall it was a really good examination at the end of the day, and built some really great rapport with those examiners for the next 7 years I was at the institution.
See, that's cool. In fact, I tell people auditors and compliance people get a bad rap. They're just doing their
Mhm.
job, and it's a great thing that they are there because overall they're protecting the entire industry, not just the organization they work for.
100%. There's this old adage specifically on compliance. If you miss something on the compliance side, it can cost people's lives with terrorists, with all this stuff. You miss a fraud, it just affects your bottom line. That's it. It always gets you to think bigger and broader, because BSA compliance, specifically around terrorist financing and the money movement. I mean, we got human trafficking. We have all the different types of trafficking, actually, more than just human. But you have drug cartels, you have all that stuff, and those are life and death type of situations. So um, it's that, and I tell my whole team always that BSA is a big part of compliance,
Mhm.
and we're here to protect not only, like you said, the institution, but the sanctity of our entire financial sector.
Yeah, and it's a quite serious topic. In fact, I had somebody here recently on from the Noble that is
Oh,
specifically
good.
in working with stopping the human trafficking side in banking. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with them as well. Um,
Yep, I am.
Okay, now one of the questions I guess I have is there's so much happening in the world of cybersecurity right now. And when I was like in your live session, you were showing me where there was like the digital imposter thing that people could, be on screen and look like somebody totally different. I hear a lot about
Yes.
pig butchering happening. I mean, there's so much. What would you say is like the first thing that people in financial institutions really should be aware of today? And I know that changes every day.
Yeah. Um, Here's where the financial sector is a little bit off, and some of the things that we've tried to fix when we built out the fraud classifier at the Federal Reserve, and I was part of that group that did that as well. The problem is the number. If you look and tear down and get to the root cause of most of the fraud the institutions are receiving, it's all scams, right?
Mhm.
The problem there is we classify how they move the money. So if I scam somebody and I use a credit card, it gets classified as credit card fraud. If I scam somebody and take over their account and move it through Zelle, it's classified as Zelle fraud, and so forth, right? In every channel, checks, ACH, wires, all of it. But it all comes back down to the actual scam. And that's the part that no matter what fraud's happening,
Mhm.
if we don't address that part and really get down to the root cause, you're never going to fix all the different symptoms that you have as part of it. So that's number one. And
So
it's
I've said for years, basically, don't
education.
blame the payment channel for the fraud. The fraud's happening. The payment channel is just used to execute the movement of the money.
100%, and that is 100% true. How we get to that point, and looking at scams, and doing the education, putting those barriers in front. We're trying to get a lot of times to frictionless processing from a payments perspective, but it's frictionless until something is abnormal, and then you have to add the friction there as part of it. And those fraud scams are the top. And just like you mentioned, the presentation, right?
Mhm.
We're seeing that. I mean, I got an email and a text message and a voicemail from our CEO at Jack Henry, and I reached out to him via Teams, and I'm like, "Hey, did you really call me?" And he said, "No, that's not me." But again,
A voicemail?
it's those imposters, a voicemail. So yeah, it's getting to the point where there's so much AI that's out there for free that you can go get a snippet. Sometimes you need 15 seconds, sometimes you need 30 seconds, sometimes you need an hour of content to be able to replicate that voice, right? Just depending on the variation of software that you're using. But yeah, it's easy. It's a lot of times free, and they can replicate a voicemail because, for instance, our CEO, you can go put in our CEO's name and in Google, and you're going to find uh, 15, 20 different presentations he's done on CNBC, MSNBC, all of those CNN, all of those channels, right? And so they're taking those snippets and really spear targeting some individuals in the institutions. I guess they didn't know what I did for a living when they reached out to me, by the way.
They weren't doing their research, so they're just throwing a big net to try and get everybody, I guess, in that case, too. But
That's
it's still,
exactly right.
it's showing the evolution of the spear phishing, like in this case, and the phishing that does take place, that it's not just the bad email anymore. Now it's an actual voicemail. And I'm assuming from what I've seen with some of this stuff, it sounds just like the person, too.
No, 100%. If I didn't do what I do for a living, I would have thought that was our CEO on the other line.
All right, now here's another one that I learned this from you too, that you could actually be video chatting live with somebody, and what you see and what you hear may not be who they really are and how they really sound. How does that happen?
No, absolutely. It's just AI. I'll give you an example. There's a TikTok, and it's Deep Tom Cruise. So if you go out to TikTok, go to Deep Tom Cruise, you will find a company out there. Uh, Metaphysics is, I think, is their name. I've drawn a blank off the top of my head, but I think it is Metaphysics. They actually went on to America's Got Talent and did Simon and a couple other people singing up on stage, and it was three opera guys behind a curtain with a camera on there, and literally on the screen you were seeing Simon Cowell and you were seeing all these people just singing opera, right? And that type of technology, the fraudsters have already taken. So in the session that you saw me present, you saw an incident where we had a lady up in the northeast of the United States, and she happened to get a text message, and it started as easy as that. And the text message just said, "How are you doing today?" Right? And she had just gotten a new phone, so she's like, "Hey, I'm not having a great day. I'm sorry, I just got a new phone. Who is this?" And then the person responds, and up and so far, all this interaction is actually with a chatbot. So at that point in time, she responds, I lost my husband 4 years ago today. And the person responds, I'm sorry to hear that. And as soon as that happens, that actually finally went to the fraudster. And the fraudster then stepped in for the chatbot and started talking. Well, they talk for the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and then they start chatting, and it becomes a relationship at that point. And his line of how he got her to engage was he told her that he lost his wife 6 years ago to a car accident, right? So that was the piece that bonded them into further conversations. Well, at that point in time, they started talking. So he used the same kind of voice, AI voice that I just told you about. They started communicating. And then she's like, hey, can we FaceTime? And he's like, sure. So he starts FaceTiming. And this was a African American gentleman, probably in his early 20s,
Hmm.
but on the screen, he's showing up as a 60-year-old English accent, white gentleman, white beard, white hair, in his conversation. So you can actually see in the software that you could see that the fraudster actually talking, and you see that coming through on her FaceTime screen. And they just do it by putting that screen and putting a camera right in front, and you're hitting that screen on the camera. Um, and and he ended up having that conversation with her for probably a year and a half, until she was drained financially. And when she was drained financially, that's when he moved on. That's when she realized it was finally she was scammed by a fraudster.
That's just terrible. I know I saw one too that had to do with dating apps. That dating apps are
Yeah,
starting to do a lot of this stuff too.
yeah, absolutely. Set up for a meeting, go out somewhere, pay that, and then they come back and say, "I missed the meeting. I missed." Get a refund back on that event,
Uh huh.
and the fraudster makes out with that refund. So it's just another type of first party refund type of fraud that's out there.
And I have to say that in that situation too, that poor lady, it was a timing thing. I once, the closest I ever came for falling for a phishing scam was I had gone to Walmart. And a lot of people do. And as I'm
Mhm.
pulling out of Walmart, I get a bad text, but a text from, well, it looks like my bank, which is one of the larger ones. And it says, hey, we just noticed you made a purchase at Walmart and that there's a problem with it. And I kid you not, I'm sitting here going, I clicked on it. I mean, I clicked on it, opened the window, and it's asking for my information. And I started to type it, then went, wait, whoa, 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 wait, this
Yep.
is not right. So here I am, a payments expert, and I started the process just because of the coincidence of timing that had taken place. And it sounds that's a lot like what happened with that lady was the coincidence of the timing that's taken place. But wow, I mean, okay, what do you do is the bigger question. How do you educate or get people to stop from falling for that?
Yeah, that's the hardest part because a lot of people, one, don't want to learn, and that's just human nature. Number two, they don't know what they don't know, right? They're not financial people. I had that personal experience. I lost a family member last week, right? So I've spent this last week of trying to get my father-in-law's, for instance, his all his affairs in order, right? He doesn't know at all, right? So it's using that kind of victim for coincidence and just people that don't know. And to be honest, my father-in-law is one of the smartest people when it comes to electricity, building, that type of thing. But when it comes to financial, he was not. So the the interesting thing, though, in this and how they are able to reach these in mass numbers is because of the chatbots that are out there.
Mhm.
Right. This is why we didn't see this explosion 4 or 5 years ago because the chatbots weren't good enough then. Now there you can I've been in situations or in places where I've walked into a site that we've made an arrest at. Not we as in Jack Henry, but we as in the United States government. And there's a wall of phones, just phones, all plugged in, all ready to go. And those phones are the ones that are plugged into a server, which then is plugged into the fraudster's a laptop, and they're literally just typing away and sending out a ton of text messages out there and letting the chat bot get to them. And literally 1,000, 2,000 phones all on a rack, all working and texting at the same time, hundreds of thousands of numbers, and then just getting those people to respond. Once they do, that's when they take over at that point in time. But yeah, the technology has made it easy to cast that wide net
Mhm.
where we used to spearfish one person at a time, one person at a time. Now I can run unlimited text message for $500 and using a chat bot for that low. So that's the cost of doing business. I scan one person. I've paid for all the resources that I needed for that month.
Now, can we be clear for somebody thinks they can just go out and buy this? Because you can, but that's something where you're going out on the dark web and you're doing nefarious things, and you're probably going to get hacked yourself if you're out there doing stuff. So, people, please.
No, you're so there's 2 points to that, and I'll hit both of them. So, first of all, you don't want to go out to the dark web if you don't know what it is, because the minute that you get out on the dark web, you become a victim yourself. So, whenever we go out on the dark web, it's usually on a secure laptop out of any network that we care about, because it's going to hit that network. They're going to get there and they're going to get information from you. So, I don't suggest anybody going out there. Number two, every tool that they use could be bought. Usually can be bought in just the regular markets that are out there. There are some things that are on the dark web in the fraud markets, like printers, right?
Hmm.
There are printers on the fraud market that can print a driver's license. There are some that can print as clearly as a true passport, minus the chip. The chip is the key part in the passports, and even in that case, some fraudsters have been able to steal some and have what they call an innie. And any is an insider at some organization where they've been able to pass some chips off to them to build some of these passports. But things like those type of printers, that's dark market. But things like cell phones, chat bots, the fraud software to use your face. I mean, think about it. Our kids use that in Snapchat. They use it in TikTok. They use it in Instagram, right? I can make my face into an elephant and talk and do all that stuff, and it's just that same technology. And there are free versions of everything. Of course, the paid versions are better. And fraudsters, you do use the paid version, but to get them started, they get the free versions that are out there.
I'm sure they have subscription models and everything too. Now, one of the things that I know that's
100%.
for sale out there that is kind of surprising that people wouldn't think of is the mailbox keys. Is that, one of the high
Yep.
dollar items is that getting those mailbox keys that are for, like, say, an apartment complex, to where one person can go and open up and get everybody's mail from the apartment complex. And I have a lot of people tell me, isn't all the fraud electronic? And I'm like, no, no, there's still so much that happens with physical checks.
Yeah, that's the resurgence of checks. So if you look at year after year for the last 10 years, checks is on average gone down in total distribution about 5% year over year, right? Check fraud right now is 181% up from last year. So there's a stark change in check fraud over the last 2 years, and mail keys are a big part of it. Literally just saw a video yesterday on the dark web with a gentleman in the actual mail um, unit. So he had gone in. He had not only an arrow key, but he had robbed a USPS employee that had a key to the facility. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, he used that key to enter the facility and then used the arrow key to actually open all the PO boxes from behind the PO box units. And that's what he was actually telling everybody on the dark web, that he has access to this now. And he was selling that access for $50,000.
Wow.
Now, the arrow key itself for a unit that can open your mail apartment complex, you can open all your business mail in that regional area. Those sell for about $2,500 to $5,000, depending on how many people are in that area. So, um, I live in Birmingham, Alabama. If you're in Birmingham, Alabama, that key is about $5,000. You go an hour south of us into more rural areas, and you get a regional key from a rural area. That's only going to be $2,500 because there's not as many mailboxes and stuff to hit.
Still, though, it's happening still in the physical world, and people, take that for granted. And I got to give my mom credit, because she's always about, don't put a check in the mail to you at the very last minute. So I do agree, she's right. But I'm one of
No,
I prefer electronic payments. Now, I want to back up a little bit, because something else you mentioned earlier I think is very important, and that's the Fed fraud classifier model. I believe you said you did some work on that too. Could you quickly just explain to people what that is and why it's so important?
yeah, absolutely. So back in 2018, Federal Reserve's Faster Payments Improvement Group pulled 21 of us of different backgrounds, large banks, small banks. ARP was, for instance, was part of it, and Kathy Stokes with that organization. So we had a real broad spectrum of people, and the reason we brought that group together, or the reason the group was brought together, was when we talk about fraud,
Mhm.
there was no consistency at all.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. The first meeting, we tried to define account takeover. There were literally 13 different definitions for account takeover, right? So everybody called it a little bit different, categorized it a little bit different. And that's what happens in the fraud world in the United States is we don't have that single taxonomy across the United States on what is fraud and what to call it and how do we actually categorize those frauds to determine where we really are getting attacked. For instance, the reason I say we categorize everything by the channel, the payment channel, that's one of the things that we try to leave out. And it was interesting because the first thing we argued, and these were all friendly arguments. These were just kind of thought processes and going out, whiteboarding things and getting pros and cons to each one of them. Just as simple as authorized versus unauthorized fraud, right? Because if you talk to several people in our group at that time, well, authorized is really not fraud because they're doing the transaction. And remember, this is 2018, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was this group of us that were like, people are starting to get scammed. We're starting to see certain things. So authorized should be part of this. And that was the first debate. And we did include it. But again, the next step is how did they actually do the transaction? How did the money actually move? Was it um, a counterfeit? Was it a deception? And we have different categories for that. And then the last um, column is the actual way we're going to classify it. This was a authorized online uh, takeover that committed fraud in the ACH and wire channel, for instance. So now we have a true classification. We're all talking the same language and out there, and it's at Fed fedpaymentsimprovement.org. God, I can't say that today for some reason. And you'll be able to see the fraud classifier out there. There are companies like Jack Henry that we built the fraud classifier into our sets of products. I have friends that were also on the board on that work group with us that have built it into their common practices. You're starting to see bigger and bigger and more adoption of it. Ultimately, what it will help with the United States is if you ever go out and read the UK fraud report,
Mm-hmm.
it's 368 pages. It'll put you to sleep. But if you do get through some of it, it will give you some great fraud insights. And the reason they do is because those institutions are all reporting fraud the same way. So they can get feedback from the institutions and then be able to say, hey, in the UK, faster payments fraud went up 22% over the last 6 months. Our card fraud actually decreased 6% over the last 12 months. And the reason is because we're all talking the same language. And that's what we're trying to get to with the fraud classifier in the United States is getting everybody to talk the same language so that we as a nation can come together and say, okay, these are the fraud types that we're starting to see in the United States. These are the increases and decreases because ultimately that helps every payment channel, that helps every institution, that helps every fintech sit there and go, okay, we're starting to see this trend go up in this type of fraud. What can we do to put some friction in there, put some detection in there to help us with those fraud losses?
And it's all information that's free you can go learn about on the Fed website too. And also know it's going to be
100%.
very important with the Fed Now service as it evolves too to be able to use that classifier model in reporting your fraud. So I'm looking forward to that. And I got to tell you, I got so many questions I want to ask, but we're running out of time. So really, the last question I got for you, and I think it's really important, is a lot of people that follow the Payments Podium are new into the electronic payments. They're getting into the industry. They come and they ask me, hey, talk to so and so, tell us more about this. But one of the things they're always asking is, how can I improve my career? So, seeing how successful you've been in working with fraud, working with cybersecurity, BSA, what would you tell somebody? What advice would you give that this is what you can do to improve your career in this area? What you might want to focus on, the steps you might want to take to be maybe a better BSA agent, a better fraud person?
Yeah. Great question, actually. And when I actually talk to colleges, that's a common question. We get into this field. The first thing and the most overlooked thing is read. People want to take shortcuts. People want to read a blog, or watch a video log. uh, it's read what's going on, read what's happening in the world, follow people, follow me, follow you on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on all our socials, listen to podcasts on the subject. So what you do is a big service for us in learning, and having your different people that are on. Um, and it's all about learning. It's all about understanding how money moves,
Mm-hmm.
and then put that fraudster. If I were to break that and I were wanted to get in the middle of that, how would I do that? And then when you can think of it and you can think of how something happens, then you know where you need to concentrate on putting a fix in or a step in, an extra operational process to mitigate that potential break point. And that's actually the biggest headbutt between operations people at our financial institutions and our fraud teams. Is our operational people a lot of times tend to think about, um, fraud people want to make put roadblocks in the place. We never want to put roadblocks. We just want to tell you where to look and where your weakest points are so you can determine that. But that's it. I mean, it's knowledge. It's getting information that's out there. Your podcast, and I've listened to probably 20 of them already. Fantastic information, and it's not only learning about the fraud side. You have to learn payments. You have to learn how payments move to be able to sit there and go, okay, these are what the fraudsters are going to do. These are how they're going to move those payments. You need to know how a bank operates, those type of things. So knowledge is key. Get into it, work your way up. Again, I started at an open house at a bank, a local bank, and worked my way up through it and found my passion. But those are the common points that I talk to college age students as they're coming out of college when I present to them.
Yeah, there is no shortcut. You got to do the work. You got to put the legwork in there. And I'm so grateful to have had you on today to just think, you started off in the hotel business, like you said, went to an open house. Next thing you know, you're getting promoted as a BSA officer who's got to go up to the sixth floor and see the OCC. And one of the greatest
Yep.
things you said too to me that I loved is if you miss something in compliance, what it can cost to the institution, what it can cost the individual. That has really stuck with me. So thank you so much for being on today. And for those of you out there watching and listening, if there is a topic or a speaker that you think should be on the Payments Podium, you can always email me, kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. I'll do all I can to make sure that I get that person or get that topic addressed on the Payments Podium. But for now, we got to say goodbye to Rene and say, well, class dismissed.